Usually when we look at the state of the world, we sort of stay in our lanes. You look at what the West is doing, or you look at the global South, but you rarely just overlay the two maps.
Right, to see where they actually cross. It's like watching two different movies at once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this week, something just clicked. We saw this bizarre, almost cinematic synchronization that we just had to dig into.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
We're looking at two speeches, both from January 2026. First, you've got the snowy peaks of Davos, the World Economic Forum, and you have Mark Carney, former central banker, now Canadian Prime Minister, the ultimate insider.
The definition of the North. The guy who literally wrote the book on financial stability.
And then, just 8 days earlier, you cut to Asmara in Eritrea.
Totally different world.
Totally. Hot, high-altitude, revolutionary history. And President Isaias Afwerki is speaking, a leader who has, spent decades fighting that same Western establishment.
A man who sees Davos as, not just a different planet, but maybe the source of the problem.
So you'd think these two speeches would be matter and antimatter.
You'd expect them to be polar opposites.
But when you read them side by side, something just jumps out.
They're not just rhyming. On the big ideas, they are practically reading from the same script.
And that's the puzzle for this deep dive. How do a Canadian liberal and an Eritrean revolutionary end up with the exact same diagnosis of the world in 2026?
And more importantly, they're both pushing for this survival strategy that it throws the last 30 years of globalization out the window.
They're calling for what we're dubbing a third path.
And to get that path, you have to understand what they're walking away from, because they are both saying very clearly that the old order is dead.
Okay, let's start with that diagnosis. Carney's speech. For a guy known for being so cautious, he really took the gloves off.
He did.
He used this metaphor, a story about a greengrocer. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, this is a deep cut, but it's just brilliant. He's borrowing from Václav Havel, the Czech dissident who became president.
The power of the powerless.
That's the one. Havel describes this greengrocer who puts a sign in his shop window right next to the onions and carrots. And the sign says, "Workers of the world, unite."
But the grocer doesn't actually care about that slogan.
Not at all. He might even think it's nonsense. But he puts it up because if he doesn't, he gets in trouble. It's a signal.
A signal to who? The authorities.
Everyone. The secret police, his neighbors. It says, "I am obedient. I'm playing the game. Leave me alone." It's just a ritual.
And Carney, the prime minister of a G7 nation, is comparing Western democracies to that terrified grocer.
He is, which is a huge statement. He's saying that for the last maybe decade, we've all been keeping a sign in the window.
And our sign says,
the rules-based international order. We pretend the UN works. We pretend the WTO can stop a trade war. We pretend the rules protect the weak.
Even though we all know deep down it's not really true.
We know it's a lie. We know the great powers, the US, China, they break those rules the second it's inconvenient. So Carney's message at Davos was basically, take the sign down.
Stop living the lie.
Stop pretending. You're not fooling anyone. He called it a tectonic break, not a transition.
And that's an important difference.
It's crucial. A transition is an upgrade, version 1 to version 2. A tectonic break is an earthquake. The ground splits. The old map is useless.
Which is a terrifying thought if you're a middle of power, like Canada.
Well, if there are no rules, you're swimming with sharks.
And that brings us right to President Afwerki in Eritrea. He's looking at the same breakdown, but from the other side of the tank.
From the receiving end, yeah.
His interview was heavy. He didn't use the Havel analogy, but he talked about the failure of unipolarity. Can we just quickly define that?
Sure. Unipolarity is just that period after the Cold War, the 90s to the 2010s, where the U.S. was the only superpower, the one pole.
The indispensable nation.
Right. And Afwerki's argument is that this whole period was a disaster for the global South. He says it didn't bring peace, it brought chaos.
And he connects this directly to the MAGA doctrine. But his take on it is, well, it's not what I've heard on the news.
No, it's a very specific, almost psychological read. Most people see Make America Great Again as aggressive, as muscle flexing.
Yeah, assertiveness.
Afwerki flips that. He sees it as an admission of weakness.
Weakness.
Yeah.
That feels backwards.
It sounds it right. But think about it. If you're truly supreme, if you're undisputed, you don't need to scream about making yourself great again. You just are great.
Huh.
He says the Magie doctrine is a reaction to decline. He points to the U.S. national debt, what is it, over $36 trillion in 2026?
Something like that, yeah.
And the loss of manufacturing dominance. He sees a superpower that is flailing.
Like a wounded animal.
Exactly. And a wounded animal is the most dangerous kind.
So,
Yeah.
okay, they're on opposite sides of the planet, but they land on this one terrifying point. The rules are a fantasy. The superpower is volatile. And relying on the old order to save you is basically a suicide pact.
That's the diagnosis. The world is broken and no one is driving the bus.
So if the world is broken,
Yeah.
what's the specific danger? I mean, volatility is a pretty vague word, but they both get very specific about what they're afraid of.
They do. And this is where we have to talk about what Carney calls weaponized interdependence.
That sounds like a textbook term. Let's break it down.
Okay, so for 30 years, the big idea was that if we all trade with each other, we won't go to war.
The Golden Arches theory. Countries with a McDonald's don't fight.
Exactly. You know, China makes our phones, Russia sells us gas, America writes the software. We're all too tangled up to fight. But Carney is saying that tangle is now a trap.
A trap. How?
Because if you control a key piece of that network, the banking system, the microchips, a shipping lane, you can strangle your opponent. You can just turn off their economy. That's weaponized interdependence.
Carney had that one line that was just chilling. If you aren't at the table.
You're on the menu.
It's just, wow. It's meant to be. He's telling other countries, look, we're a nice, polite middle power. But in this new world, we can't negotiate alone. If we go in alone, we get eaten. And Afwerki sees that menu too, but in a different way. He's not just talking about tariffs or sanctions. He sees a literal, physical grab for resources.
This was maybe the most intense part of his interview. He lists what he calls 9 or 10 strategic instruments that he sees the U.S. using.
Like what?
Psychological warfare, sabotage, cyber attacks. But ultimately, he thinks it's about theft.
Theft of what?
Minerals. Energy, the stuff you need to build the future. He believes the U.S. is intervening in places not for democracy, but to lock down the lithium, the cobalt, the resources they need to contend China and Russia.
He called it ambush and hijacking.
That's the phrase.
Yeah, and he gave some examples that, well, you don't hear them framed this way very often. He brought up Venezuela.
He did. And we have to be clear, this is his perspective. The Western story is about narcotics or authoritarianism. Afwerki sees the pressure on someone like President Maduro as a straight-up resource grab. He sees it as, we want your oil, you won't play ball, so we'll remove you.
And he connected that to other places too. The Congo, Mexico, and Greenland.
Yes. Greenland is the amazing crossover. Both speeches mention Greenland.
I missed that. How?
Afwerki sees U.S. pressure on Greenland as part of this resource war, an attempt to buy or control it for its minerals and strategic location.
And Carney?
Carney talks about standing with Greenland and Denmark to protect their sovereignty. So one sees a predator, the other sees an ally needing a shield. But they both agree on the core fact. Greenland is being targeted because the great powers are hungry.
So it doesn't matter if it's weaponized interdependence or ambush and hijacking. The mechanism is the same. The giants act on self-interest, and sovereignty is just a speed bump.
Exactly. So what do you do? If you're Canada or Eritrea or any other country, how do you stay off the menu?
This is the third path. It seems to come down to two main pillars. The first one is, well, radical self-reliance.
Or as Carney puts it, hard sovereignty.
Hard sovereignty. What does that mean for a country like Canada?
It means a massive pivot away from globalization. For decades, we were happy to just import things. Cheaper from China, cheaper from Mexico, Carney is saying. That era is over. He's talking about a fortress economy.
And trillion-dollar investment.
Trillions, yeah. In energy, in AI, in critical minerals. The logic is brutal, but simple. A state that cannot feed, fuel, or defend itself has no real options.
So if you depend on a supply chain that a superpower can just cut off,
you're not a sovereign country. You're a client state. You're a vassal.
domestic production is now national security.
It's existential, and this is exactly where Afwerki agrees. He calls it cleaning the internal house.
But for Eritrea, that looks a bit different. It's more about rejecting aid, isn't it?
It is. He's militant on this. He rejects what he calls the give and take of international aid because he sees it as a leash. You take their money, you take their orders.
He mentioned a U.S. State Department report claiming investment there was impossible.
Right. A report basically said Eritrea was a no-go zone, and Afwerki's reaction was to dismiss it as demonization. His point was, we don't care. We don't want your conditional support. We have to fix our own house first.
So it's fascinating. You have the rich G7 nations saying, We need to build our own factories so we're not vulnerable.
And the developing African nation saying, we need to grow our own food so we're not vulnerable.
It's the same logic. Put your own oxygen mask on first.
Because nobody is coming to save you.
So you do everything alone, right? Canada can't grow bananas. Eritrea isn't building AI chips. So there has to be something beyond the fortress.
And that's pillar 2, regionalism. But it's not the old fuzzy, let's all be friends, globalism. This is strategic.
Carney calls them multifaceted alliances, which sounds a bit like an open relationship.
That's a great way to put it. In the Cold War, you were married to either Team USA or Team USSR.
You wore the ring.
You stayed faithful. Carney is saying the marriage is over. Now you date around based on what you need.
Give me an example of this. Geopolitical dating.
Okay, so Carney mentions the safe agreement with the EU for defense stuff. So you partner with Europe for guns, but then maybe you partner with Qatar for energy. And this is the big one. He says you have to engage with China.
Wait, engage with China? While he's warning about the threat.
That's the third path. It's transactional. You don't have to share their values, but you have to do business with them on trade or AI, because if you don't, you get left behind. You sign the contract, not the ideology.
Purely pragmatic. No emotion.
None. And Afwerki has the same idea with his neighborhood strategy.
The neighborhood. That's cozy.
It's anything but. It's defensive. He says flat out that going to Washington to shake hands is a third or fourth priority.
Wow. That's a slap in the face to the diplomats.
It's a huge statement. He's saying, my problems aren't in Washington, my problems are here. The Horn of Africa, Sudan, the Red Sea.
And why is that the priority?
Because if your neighbor's house is on fire, your house is next. He argues that the great powers exploit local divisions. If the neighborhood is solid, the external powers can't get a foothold.
So build a fortress at home, then build a firewall with your neighbors so you can't be picked off one by one.
You create a block that's too big to swallow.
But this requires such a huge change in how we think.
Yeah.
I mean, we're so used to talking about values. We stand with democracies, we oppose dictators. But it sounds like they're both saying, just get over it.
Which brings us to the reality check. And this is the hardest part. Carney calls it value-based realism.
Which sounds like a contradiction.
It does. But his point is, we have our values, we like democracy, sure, but we live in the real world. And in the real world, to survive, you have to do business with people who don't share those values. He says nostalgia is not a strategy.
You can't just wish the 1990s would come back.
No, you can't hope America goes back to being the benevolent global policeman. That's over. You deal with the world as it is.
And Afwerki is also pretty pragmatic here. I mean, for all his tough talk, he said he's willing to engage with the U.S.
Yes, and he specifically mentioned that 7 years were wasted under previous administrations, that there was a missed opportunity to get things done.
So he's not slamming the door shut.
No, but the terms of entry have changed. He calls it rectifying wrongs. It's not, I'm here to beg for aid. It's, I'm here to talk as an equal to fix past mistakes.
He also had a warning, didn't he? Something for his own people about the media.
Yeah. Don't be captivated by sensationalist media narratives. He's basically saying the great powers use information as a weapon to make you feel weak or dependent. Look at the facts on the ground, not the headlines.
It's so striking. A G7 leader and a global South revolutionary, both looking their people in the eye and saying, grow up.
In a nutshell, yes. Stop waiting for a savior. The great powers aren't coming to save you. They're coming to extract from you.
It's a sobering message, but maybe also an empowering one.
I think so. It's the end of being passive. It's about taking the wheel back.
Okay, let's bring this all back to you, the listener. We've gone from Davos to Asmara. We've talked about the death of the old order.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this, maybe you run a business, maybe you're a student. What's the actual lesson here?
The lesson is that integration is now a risk. For 30 years, we thought the more connected we were, the safer we were. Just-in-time supply chains, global outsourcing, everything tied together.
And it's now dangerous.
It's very dangerous. So the lesson of 2026 is diversification and self-reliance. If you rely on one supplier, one client, one ally, you are incredibly vulnerable.
You need a third path in your own life. Have a backup plan.
Have a backup. Have a fortress of your own skills or resources. Don't be that greengrocer just hoping the authorities don't notice you. Take the sign down.
It's all about having options. Plan B, plan C.
Exactly.
You know, that brings up one last provocative thought for me. We've spent this whole deep dive talking about how middle powers and the global South need to adapt to the great powers.
Right. We treat the U.S. and China like they're forces of nature, like
Right.
gravity.
What if they're not? What if Canada and the EU and the African Union and all these other blocs, what if they all actually start following this third path? If they all build their own fortresses and regional alliances?
I see where you're going with this.
If they stop needing America for protection and they stop needing China for cheap goods? What happens to the great powers?
That is the trillion-dollar question.
Does the menu just disappear if everyone refuses to be served?
I mean, if the middle powers just stop playing the game of pick a side, the great powers lose all their leverage. A superpower without client states is, well, it's just a big country, alone in the dark.
They might find their world has suddenly become very crowded.
And a crowded table is always better than being on the menu.
I couldn't agree more. That's a wrap for this deep dive into the third path. Thanks for exploring this tectonic shift with us.
Always a pleasure.
Keep your eyes open, take the sign out of the window, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.